Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm really glad you're tuning in today because we are going deep, really deep into one of America's, well, darkest and most enduring historical mysteries.
We really are.
We're tackling a name that just screams turn of the century terror, often branded, as America's first serial killer.
That label itself is loaded, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm talking, of course, about Herman Webster Mudgett, but you probably know him better as H.H. Holmes. Okay, let's unpack this because many of you will know the basics. You've probably heard the nicknames.
Oh yeah, the Beast of Chicago.
The Devil in the White City, the Torture Doctor, all that stuff. His most famous or infamous crimes are always set against that dramatic backdrop of Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition.
Such a pivotal moment in American history.
Right. But what's really behind those sensational headlines, that's what we're digging into today, looking at the actual historical record from our sources.
And that's exactly our mission here. The 1890s, you see, were just this perfect storm. You had cities booming, new technology changing everything, and this explosion in the media landscape with what they called yellow journalism.
Ah, yes, the original clickbait, essentially.
Pretty much. Prioritizing sensation over fact to sell papers. And at the same time, forensics barely existed. Fingerprinting was brand new. Police departments in different states hardly talked to each other.
It's a perfect environment for someone like Holmes.
Exactly. It was his hunting ground. And what's fascinating truly is how fast the legend of Holmes, fueled by those newspapers, just completely overshadowed the, well, often more complex and sometimes even mundane reality of his actual criminal life.
Mundane. That seems like an odd word for Holmes.
Well, compared to the legend, yeah. We need to separate the wild tabloid stories from the confirmed facts. In his career, it was long. Our sources show insurance fraud, forgery, lots of swindling, multiple bigamous marriages, horse theft, and yes, definitely murder.
Okay, so our goal is to peel back those layers of myth and try to find the real Herman Mudgett.
That's the plan.
All right, so to really get a handle on the monster, we have to start at the beginning. With the man himself, Herman Webster Mudgett, born May 16th, 1861, Gilmanton, New Hampshire.
Rural background.
Yeah, farming family, devout Methodist parents. Sounds almost wholesome, but it wasn't. His father was reportedly a heavy drinker, pretty brutal with the kids apparently, and Herman himself got bullied at school, partly because he was smart.
Which often happens, unfortunately.
But here's where it gets really interesting, something that honestly kind of jumped out at me from the research. This incident at school, bullies dragged him into a doctor's office, forced him to stand in front of a real human skeleton.
Oh, wow.
And they actually put its bony hands on his face to scare him. He was terrified, naturally. But then, according to him later, something flipped.
Flipped how?
He said it helped him get over his fear of death. And instead of being traumatized, he developed this, well, obsession with death. Started dissecting animals, that sort of thing.
Okay, if we connect that to the bigger picture, that's telling, isn't it? It doesn't immediately scream sadist, maybe, but it shows this detachment.
Detachment, yeah, like turning fear into, what, clinical curiosity.
Exactly. Or maybe even seeing it as something to be controlled, mastered, or even, used. It's less about the horror and more about the mechanics, maybe. It suggests this early, very pragmatic, calculating way of looking at life and death. Not about empathy, but about utility.
Utility. That's a chilling word for it.
It is. And it lays the groundwork. He went to the University of Vermont for a year, then transferred to the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. Graduated in '84, though apparently his grades were just okay.
And crucially, he worked in the anatomy lab there.
Right, which involved getting cadavers, often through, let's say, unofficial channels. Grave robbing was pretty common then, sadly, because they needed bodies for study.
And Holmes himself later admitted using cadavers for what? Insurance scams? Even back in college?
Yes, claiming accidental deaths to collect policies. So that pattern, exploiting death for money, it started really, really early. It wasn't just a later development.
Wow. Okay, so from these, let's call them formative years, he eventually lands in Chicago, August 1886. And this is when Herman Mudgett becomes H.H. Holmes.
Right, adopting the pseudonym, probably trying to dodge issues from his past. Apparently there was already a bigamous marriage back in New Hampshire, maybe some other troubles.
He finds a drugstore in Inglewood, gets a job, seems like a good worker, and then through means that seem a bit murky.
Always a bit murky with Holmes.
He ends up owning the place. Then he buys the empty lot across the street, and in 1887 starts building this 3-story mixed-use building. And here we go. This is the infamous murder castle, right? The legend begins.
Oh, absolutely. This is ground zero for the myth. The popular image, the one you see everywhere, is just horrifying. Secret passages, torture chambers, trapdoors leading to chutes.
Gas chambers, acid vats in the basement, dissecting tables, a crematorium. It's like something out of a gothic horror novel.
Exactly. And it's terrifying. But, and this is a big but, this raises that crucial question. How much of what we think we know about figures like Holmes is just media hype, shaped by those yellow journalists back then, rather than actual fact?
So you're saying the murder castle wasn't real, not
And
like the stories.
not in the way it's usually portrayed, no. Our sources are pretty clear that those sensational claims were massively fabricated or exaggerated. The building itself, it was moderately sized, nowhere near the 100-room labyrinth people imagine.
100 rooms. Yeah, I've heard that number.
Pure fiction, and a lot of it wasn't even finished. Holmes was constantly fighting with the builders, mostly because he wasn't paying them, so they'd walk off the job.
So the hidden rooms, the secret passages?
They existed, some of them,
Yeah.
but the evidence suggests they were mainly for hiding furniture he bought on credit so it couldn't be repossessed, or maybe facilitating some of his swindles, not primarily designed as torture chambers.
Okay, that actually makes a weird kind of sense, given his focus on fraud. Hide the evidence of his debts.
Precisely. And there's no real evidence he was systematically luring World's Fair visitors into this building to kill them on sight. That seems to be pure invention.
So the image of scores of tourists disappearing into the castle during the fair, mostly myth. That's quite a deflation of the legend.
It is. The reality is often less theatrical. The hotel part, on the 3rd floor, largely unfinished, and the building's actual fate. After Holmes was arrested, it was gutted by a fire, probably arson, but never proven who did it.
Oh, okay.
Then it was rebuilt, used as a post office for decades, until 1938. Now, the site just holds the Englewood Post Office branch.
Wow. A post office. It's such a contrast to the whole devil in the white city image.
It really is. But that doesn't mean Holmes wasn't dangerous or didn't kill people there. His intent was still incredibly dark, even if the architecture wasn't purpose-built for murder on an industrial scale.
Right, because in his confession, Holmes did talk about his methods. He claimed he killed people by suffocating them using chloroform, or lighting gas fumes, or even locking them in an airless vault he supposedly had.
Yes, he mentioned those. And starvation, even burning victims alive. So while the building might be exaggerated, his capacity for cruelty and his methods, or at least his claimed methods, were still horrific.
Okay, so behind the maybe overblown castle myth and the big cons, there were real people, real victims whose lives were destroyed. As his schemes got bigger, it seems he just got more ruthless. Let's talk about some of them.
We need to. It grounds the story in the human cost.
One of the earliest confirmed cases involves Julia Smith and her little daughter, Pearl Connor, who was only 5. This was around Christmas Eve, 1891. Julia was Holmes's mistress, worked in his pharmacy.
Right. Entangled personally and professionally.
And the story goes she died during an abortion Holmes performed on her. Then, Holmes claimed he poisoned little Pearl to cover up her mother's death.
And the evidence.
A partial skeleton of a child was found in his cellar later, strongly suggesting he wasn't lying about that, at least. Just horrific.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you start seeing these grim patterns emerge, even early on. Motives like financial gain, sure, but also covering up affairs, maybe pregnancy's gone wrong, and just eliminating anyone who knew too much or became an inconvenience.
Like Emmeline Sigrand, December 1892.
Exactly. She was another secretary, young woman, 23. She disappeared. The theory police had was that she might have gotten pregnant, another victim of a botched abortion, or the subsequent cover-up. Her skeleton was also found.
Just awful. And then the Williams sisters, Minnie and Nanny, Wilhelmina and Anna, that was 1893.
Yes. Minnie Williams was an actress he got involved with. Holmes, using an alias Harry Gordon, convinced her to sign over property deeds to him, property she'd likely inherited or acquired somehow.
More fraud.
Classic Holmes. Then he started using her name in other scams. Neither Minnie nor her sister Nanny were seen alive after July 1893. When investigators finally searched the building, they found burned clothing thought to belong to Minnie.
So likely murdered, too. It fits that pattern you mentioned, getting in his way, knowing too much.
Precisely. And author Adam Seltzer, who's done a ton of deep research on Holmes, really emphasizes this point. He argues Holmes's murders usually had a clear, practical motive. It wasn't random killing for thrills. It was about removing obstacles, silencing witnesses, protecting his frauds.
So less like a typical serial killer driven by psychological compulsion, and more like a ruthless con artist whose ultimate tool was murder when needed.
That's Seltzer's perspective, largely backed by the known facts. It challenges that simple serial killer label, which often implies a different kind of motivation, more about the act itself. For Holmes, it seems murder was often just business, cold, calculated business.
That is a chilling distinction. But I have to ask, for our listeners who are maybe trying to square this calculated approach with the sheer horror, is there any hint that he derived some kind of, I don't know, sadistic pleasure beyond just the practical gain? Or was he truly just ice cold?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, the sources point mostly towards ice cold. The acts were monstrous, showing a total lack of empathy, obviously. But there's very little evidence he killed for the thrill or for some kind of twisted sexual gratification, which you often see in profiles of psychopathic serial killers.
So the violence was instrumental.
It seems so, a means to an end. Minnie Williams was useful, then she wasn't, or she knew too much about the property fraud, so she had to go. The deaths were often planned to look like accidents or just disappearances, all to facilitate the next scam or cover his tracks. The driver seems consistently financial or logistical. It's a disturbingly pragmatic view of human life.
Pragmatic, it's a word that keeps coming up. It really paints him as this calculating machine who just happened to use murder as one of his tools.
I think that's closer to the truth than the mad doctor in his torture castle image.
And that calculating nature, that pragmatism, it really peaks, doesn't it, with the case that finally brought him down, the Benjamin Petzl family.
Absolutely. The Patalisol murders are central to understanding Holmes's downfall and, frankly, his utter depravity.
Introduce Benjamin Petzl for us. He wasn't just a random victim.
No, not at all. Petzl was a carpenter, had a bit of a criminal past himself, and he became Holmes's right-hand man. Almost completely under Holmes's influence, one district attorney literally called him Holmes's tool, his creature.
Wow. So Petzl is just deeply involved in Holmes's schemes.
Yes, involved in several scams. And that led to the big one, the insurance fraud scheme. Holmes cooked up this plan to fake Petersel's death, aiming to collect a $10,000 life insurance policy. That was a lot of money back then.
Okay, so how is it supposed to work? Stage an accident.
Yeah, Petersel's was supposed to pose as an inventor, fake a lab explosion, and they'd swap in a cadaver that Holmes would acquire. Petersel would then disappear, and they'd split the money.
But Holmes being Holmes?
Holmes being Holmes, he double-crossed him. Instead of faking it, on September 4, 1894, in Philadelphia, Holmes just killed Petzl, knocked him out with chloroform, then set his body on fire using benzene to make it look like that planned lab explosion.
He killed his own accomplice.
Killed his accomplice, made it look like the accident they planned, and then this is crucial forensic evidence, later showed the chloroform was actually administered after Petzl was already dead.
Yeah.
So he likely killed him some other way first, then used the chloroform and fire to stage the scene.
Unbelievable. And then he collected the insurance money on Petzl's actual body.
Collected the full $10,000. The audacity is just staggering. But it didn't stop there. That's when it gets even darker.
If that's possible.
He went to Petzl's wife, Carrie, who had no idea her husband was actually dead. Holmes convinced her that Benjamin was alive but had to stay in hiding, maybe in London, because the insurance scam had gone wrong or something.
Oh, no.
And then he persuaded her, this grieving, confused woman, to let him take 3 of their 5 children into his care. Said he'd take them to see their father eventually.
He took the kids. Which ones?
Alice was about 13, Nellie, who was 9, and little Howard, who was only 7.
My God. He's got the insurance money, the accomplice is dead, and now he has his children. What was he planning?
It's almost incomprehensible. But what followed was this incredibly complex, multi-layered deception. He starts traveling across the northeastern U.S. and into Canada with the 3 Petzl children.
While telling them they're going to see their dad.
Exactly, keeping up that lie. But at the same time, he's escorting Carrie Petzl, the mother, along a different parallel route, feeding her false hope about her husband.
So he's juggling the kids in one place, the mother in another.
And wait, there's more. Simultaneously, he's also traveling, separately again, with his own wife, Georgiana Yoke, his 3rd wife, whom he'd recently married bigamously and who knew nothing about any of this.
He's managing 3 separate groups of people, 3 sets of lies across huge distances. How did he even keep track? It's mind-bending.
The sheer logistical complexity on top of the sheer evil is just astounding. He was a master manipulator on an unbelievable scale.
And the fate of those poor children, it's just heartbreaking to even think about. What happened to Alice and Ellie?
In Toronto, on October 25, 1894. This is horrific. Holmes murdered them. He forced them into a large trunk, locked it, drilled a hole in the lid, and then ran a hose from a gas line into the trunk asphyxiating them
Oh my God, in a trunk.
in a trunk. He then buried their bodies naked in the cellar of the house he was renting there. The level of cold calculation involved in murdering 2 children that way, it's beyond
It
understanding.
really is. What does that reveal about him? That any semblance of humanity was just gone.
It seems so. That pragmatic opportunism we talked about, it had absolutely no floor, no moral bottom. If someone, even children entrusted to his care, became inconvenient or a risk, their life meant nothing. And this is where the police work becomes so vital.
Right. Detective Frank Geyer.
Yes, Philadelphia Police Detective Frank Geyer. His work was extraordinary. He painstakingly retraced Holmes's convoluted steps across multiple states up into Canada, often weeks or months behind Holmes, piecing together hotel records, rental agreements.
Like a needle in a haystack back then.
Totally. No computers, no cell phones, just relentless pavement-pounding detective work. He's the one who found the decomposed bodies of Alice and Nellie in that Toronto cellar. He wrote about the horrible smell as they dug. It haunted him.
Finding them must have been devastating, but crucial.
Absolutely. And finding them, along with some unsent letters the children had written to their mother that Holmes had carelessly kept. Chilling letters describing their travels with Mr. Holmes that led Geyer to suspect the worst for the 3rd child, Howard.
Where did he find Howard?
Geyer traced Holmes back to Indianapolis. And there, investigating a house Holmes had rented, they found Howard's remains. Holmes had killed him earlier, around October 10th. Drugged him, apparently, then dismembered the body and burned it in the stove or chimney.
Burned him.
Yes. They found fragments of bone and teeth in the chimney flue, enough to identify him.
Just evil.
It's pure evil.
Yeah.
But Geyer's work, connecting all these dots across jurisdictions, finding the bodies. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it was a landmark piece of early forensic investigation. He single-handedly unraveled Holmes's whole twisted web and finally brought him down.
And brought him down it did. Holmes couldn't keep juggling forever. His capture finally came on November 17th, 1894, in Boston.
Right, tracked down by the Pinkertons, the famous Pinkerton National Detective Agency.
Initially, the warrant was just for horse theft back in Texas, wasn't it? But by then, the authorities were putting things together.
Yeah, the net was closing in. Geyer's discoveries were starting to filter through. Suspicions were sky high. Holmes was actually apparently about to flee the country, maybe go to Europe with wife number 3, Georgiana, who still didn't know the full extent of things.
But they caught him just in time, and the trial.
He was tried in Philadelphia in October 1895, specifically for the murder of Benjamin Peitzel. That was the case where they had the strongest, most direct evidence, thanks largely to Geyer's work connecting the fraud, the body, and Holmes's movements. He was found guilty.
And then came the confession, right? The big sensational confession.
Oh, yeah. After the conviction, facing execution, Holmes sold his story to the Hearst newspapers for $7,500. Big money then. And he confessed to 27 murders.
27, that's the number people often cite.
It is, but this raises a huge question about reliability, doesn't it? Our source is very clear. Only 8 of those 27 confessions were ever actually confirmed. Maybe one other was considered probable.
Only 8 or 9 out of 27. What about the others?
Many were completely disproven. People he claimed to have killed were found alive and well. Others had died of documented natural causes years before. Holmes just lied. Extensively.
Just for the money. Or was it ego?
Probably both. He had what the sources call a massive propensity for lying, even when it didn't seem to help him. He even confessed to killing a former medical school classmate who had actually died naturally years later up in Canada. It's like he couldn't stop manipulating the narrative, even his own dark legacy.
So the confession itself was another con, in a way.
A final performance, perhaps? Selling a sensational story? Controlling the narrative one last time? It's almost a chilling parallel to how the yellow press had inflated his story in the first place. He learned from them, maybe.
Wow. Okay, so the end comes. Execution. May 7, 1896, at Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia.
That's right. Hanged.
Accounts say he was strangely calm, almost amiable right up to the end. Showed very little fear or remorse. He did have that weird request, though, didn't he?
Yeah.
About his burial.
He did. Very specific. He asked for his coffin to be filled with concrete and then buried 10 feet deep.
Why?
Apparently, he was afraid of grave robbers, worried someone would dig him up, maybe for dissection, like the bodies he himself had procured back in medical school. The irony is thick.
Deep irony. And the execution itself, it didn't go smoothly.
No, it was reportedly quite gruesome. His neck didn't snap instantly as it's supposed to in a hanging. He strangled slowly for over 15 minutes, according to witnesses. A truly grim end.
Macabre, fittingly enough. But the story doesn't quite end there, does it? There was that recent exhumation.
Right. Fast forward over a century to 2017. These rumors persisted that Holmes had somehow faked his death, conned his way out of the execution, and someone else was buried in his place.
Seriously, after all that.
People love a conspiracy. So his descendants actually petitioned to have the body exhumed to check the DNA. And what's fascinating is, because of that concrete he requested,
Oh, the concrete preserved him.
remarkably so, the lack of oxygen meant his body hadn't decomposed in the usual way. His clothes were apparently largely intact. Even his mustache was still there.
No way.
Yes, and they were able to confirm his identity positively using dental records. So it was Holmes in the grave. The escape legend was just another myth. He was then reburied.
Even in death, he keeps generating stories.
Absolutely. It speaks to the enduring power of his story, doesn't it? Despite debunking the wilder parts of the Murder Castle legend, the core of his crimes, the cons, the betrayals, the Petetzel murders, remains chillingly real and captivating. You see it in things like the long-planned movie adaptation of The Devil in the White City, countless documentaries, books. He's a fixture in our dark history.
He really is, and it's quite a journey we've taken, hasn't it? From those really outlandish legends, the whole murder castle spectacle, down to the more calculated but no less chilling reality of his actual crimes.
It's fascinating.
And it really hammers home how important historical context is, right?
Yeah.
Trying to separate the truth from the sensationalism, especially from that era of yellow journalism. It makes you question how much we really know.
Totally. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Holmes is just this stark reminder, isn't he? About the power of stories, narratives, both the true ones and the exaggerated ones, and how they shape how we understand history, and maybe even the darker sides of human nature.
Yeah, it definitely challenges us, and hopefully you listening, to think more critically about the stories we hear, especially the really wild ones. Question the sources, look deeper.
Always good advice.
Exactly, and maybe that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. You know, what other historical figures, especially the ones wrapped up in crime or mystery, might we only know through this kind of haze of exaggeration and myth? And maybe more profoundly, what does our fascination with those exaggerated stories say about us? Do we sometimes prefer the more compelling tale over the less convenient truth?
That is a provocative thought to end on.
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.